So welcome everyone to today's event, a Q&A with artists Cozette Phillips, Harlan Butt, and Marilyn DA Silva, which is in conjunction with our It Takes a Village exhibit, which is our first ever crowd curated exhibition. I'm Dorothy Swadick. I'm the exhibitions coordinator here at the Metal Museum. Also here today is Brooke Garcia, who is our collections and exhibitions manager. And we also have artists Cozette, Harlan, and Marilyn, who are winners of Best Cast Sculpture, Best Vessel, and Best Functional Artwork, respectively. Thank you all for joining us today. So just some background on the exhibition. It Takes a Village, like I said, is a crowd-curated exhibition that presents 25 works from the Metal Museum's permanent collection. All of the artworks in the show were selected by popular vote online and on social media. Inside the gallery, voter comments about the artwork were put in place of traditional object labels, and the show also includes a video component where voters submitted kind of selfie-style recordings, further discussing their favorite artworks. The Metal Museum is proud to present our first ever crowd-curated exhibition, and we're delighted to invite some of the participating artists to speak with us today. Before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I'll just take a moment to acknowledge our supporters. The Metal Museum receives exhibition and programming support through the Wingate Foundation and the Hyde Family Foundation, and operational support through Arts Memphis and the Tennessee Arts Commission. So thank you, supporters. Okay, now I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists today. So bear with me, I'm going to read some bios and then we'll get into the questions. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Cozette Phillips, who is an interdisciplinary sculptor and metalsmith based in Washington State. She began her studies in metalsmithing at Missouri State University and holds a Master of Fine Arts degree from the State University of New York and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Columbus College of Art and Design. Her sculptural works investigate the tension of humanity's influences on the environment. Phillips maintains a studio practice in Spokane, Washington, and is very active exhibiting her art, and she's also been featured in solo and group exhibitions across the country. She's a curator for the Washington State Arts Commission and an associate professor of art at Columbia Basin College. Welcome, Cozette. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Harlan Butt. Harlan is an artist and metalsmith with a career that spans over 4 decades. Butt holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Tyler School of Art and a Master of Fine Arts degree from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. He's a professor emeritus at the University of North Texas, where he taught from 1976 to 2017. He is also the former president of the Enamelist Society, former president of the Society of president of the Society of North American Goldsmiths, fellow of the American Crafts Council, and a member of the Society of American Silversmiths. Butt is well known for his metal vessels and containers, which use colorful enamel and cloisonne techniques. His work is represented in numerous collections, including the Enamel Arts Foundation, the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, the Renwick Gallery, the Museum of Art and Design, the Metal Museum, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, among many others. Welcome, Harlan. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be here.
And I'd like to also introduce Marilyn DA Silva, our third panelist. So Marilyn DA Silva's metalwork is based on telling stories through imagery and representational elements. Her trademark surface treatment of gesso and colored pencil creates a rich palette for sculpture and wearable pieces. She earned her MFA in jewelry design and metalsmithing at Indiana University and her BS in art education at Bowling Green State University. DA Silva's work has been displayed nationally and internationally, including at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and is represented in both public and private collections. In 1999, she was named Master Metalsmith by the Metal Museum here in Memphis. She was made a Fellow of the American Craft Council in 2007 and selected as Master of the Medium in Jewelry and Metals by the Renwick Gallery in 2016. Currently, she's the professor and program chair of the Jewelry and Metal Arts Department at California College of the Arts in Oakland, where she's been since 1987. Welcome, Marilyn. We're happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
Of course. Awesome. So thank you all for joining us for today's Q&A. We're really excited to get into it. So without further ado, let's start off with some questions. And just for anyone who's watching us today, if any questions come up for you all during our conversation, please feel free to drop them in our chat, and we'll kind of circle back at the end of our program today and take a look at your questions. Awesome. All right, first question. If all of you wouldn't mind responding in whatever order feels right. So whoever wants to start, go for it. But how did you all get started in your career as an artist? And how did you start working with metal? And why metal over other materials?
I could start if you'd like.
Awesome. Thank you, Marilyn.
I've always loved art, and even as a little kid, you could find me under the Christmas tree with a brand new box of crayons and pad of paper, and just constantly making things out of cardboard and wood. And so as I got into high school, I had a wonderful art teacher that just let me experiment with metal, and that continued on into undergrad. And it was in undergrad that I decided that I wanted to spend my life working with metal. So I was fortunate to be accepted into Indiana University and study with Alma Eichelman, who really changed my life and helped me to look at things in a whole new way. And I hope that I can continue sharing with my students all the wonderful things that she gave to me. And I'm happiest when I'm sitting in my studio and working with my hands.
Awesome. I love that. I love thinking of, like, career and joy don't have to be separate, right? Awesome. How about you all, Harlan and Cozette?
If you want me to go next, I
Go
can
ahead.
jump in. For me, it's kind of like Marilyn. I enjoy. I really owe it all to my parents and educators. My parents always said and kind of drove this into my mind, this mantra of they just wanted me to do what made me happy. And so for that, I kind of owe a lot to them because I knew the one thing I did know early on is that making made me happy. So in math, didn't. So in high school, I knew the only choice for me was to go on and pursue art at an art school. And so I found myself at the Columbus College of Art and Design, where I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in sculpture. But after that, I was kind of drifting, and I still didn't feel like I had really found myself or my voice as an artist, but I knew what made me happy, which was to make. And so I wound up in Springfield, Missouri, and I started taking classes with the amazing Sarah Perkins, and was first introduced into metals. And I just kind of owe a lot, just a huge debt of gratitude to her, because I remember sitting in her office and she had conversations with me, just kind of thinking about what's next, because I was kind of drifting and I didn't know. And she planted that seed in my mind about grad school, and kind of started that kind of confidence that maybe I could do that. And she talked to me about SUNY New Paltz and Jamie and Myra, Myra Mimlich Gray and Jamie Bennett. And I eventually found myself there. I tried, production jewelry for a while and production sculpture, and realized with those two experiences, combining everything, thinking that that was going to be the thing, I realized I needed grad school to find my voice and to make work for myself and express my ideas. So I owe it all to my educators and my parents. And I think with metal, choosing it over other medias, I think has just come with not just the pleasure of working with the material itself, but also it really lends itself with its embedded meaning that can come with it. For me, I choose those non-precious metals like steel and aluminum and things such as that, because they connect for me to industry and our built environments, kind of communicate that idea but I love it because it has inherent value. It just comes with the material. You can shine it to a high polish, and it's like this mirror finish that reflects our present day and our reality. You can also hammer it and leave evidence of your touch and your mark. But most of all, you can cast with it, which comes up in my work a lot. And it's just that record of a moment in 3 dimensions, which, you know, I love the 3-dimensional. And so it's just the perfect medium for me to communicate and just kind of record time and memory and kind of the tactile qualities of what it means to live in this world. So.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and just you know, thinking about all of the kind of variety of things you can do with metal, it's like a really nice reminder of just why so many folks are drawn to it. So, thank you. All right, Harlan, how about you? How did you get started in your career as an artist?
Well, not too long ago, I came across a little booklet I made. I must have been 7 or 8 when I made it, on construction paper. And it was like a little drawing of a flower. Each page had a drawing of a flower. And then on the page next to it was a poem that I wrote. And I'm still doing pretty much exactly the same thing. So that's sort of how it got started. I was an art major in high school. And then I applied to school for a bachelor's degree and ended up going to Tyler School of Art. I didn't really know about metals. I mean, I'd done some work with metal, but it didn't occur to me that that would be an area I would focus on. And the first 2 years there, you had to take a little bit of everything, a class in ceramics and fibers and sculpture and painting, so forth. I enjoyed everything, but metals just clicked. It was rigid enough for me to make my mark on and for it to stay that way, but still malleable enough to manipulate. So the material itself was something that I felt I could use to express what I was trying to do. I did a little bit of enameling in undergraduate school, but I didn't do it again for years after that. I didn't do any enameling in graduate school. I went to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale and studied with Brent Kington and did some blacksmithing, as well as working with non-ferrous metals. And then after that, I went here and there and ended up, my first job where I was teaching was at San Diego State University. I was there working with Helen Shirk, and I think I was influenced a great deal by Helen's work, her use of color and form. And then when after that, I moved to Texas, where I started teaching at the University of North Texas. And a student came in who wanted to do some enameling, and so I kind of got interested in it from that. And that's when I started doing enameling. So my sort of history in metal is longer than my history in enamel itself, but I felt the two came together really nicely. And I was working 3-dimensionally right from the beginning. So and I was looking for a way to use color on the 3-dimensional work. So enameling just sort of felt like the right way to go.
Right. No, that's so interesting. I feel like everyone kind of spoke about mentorship and the role that that played in getting into metal, but I love the idea of someone you were mentoring kind of brought you back around to enameling. It's a really interesting story. Wow. Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing how you got into metal and choosing art as a career. I'm going to kind of transition now to our next question. And Harlan, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but thinking about kind of inspiration and the idea behind your work. I'd love to hear from each of you about your piece that's in our exhibition, It Takes a Village, and what is the idea behind the piece, as well as how was it made? Whoever would like to start first, feel free.
Okay, I guess I'll start.
Awesome.
So the piece in the exhibition is Kylex, and that came from an exhibition back in, I think it was 2014, that took place at Marywood University, and it was called the Kylex Exhibition. And they asked, it was an invitational, I think there were about 45 people they invited, and it just had to be a Kylex. So and a Kylex is like came originally from the Greek, a vessel, pottery vessel used for drinking wine. And so everybody could interpret that any way they wanted to. And all of my work really has been nature oriented in one way or another, talking about nature or the environment. So in this case, I decided to go with the maple leaf theme. When I was growing up, we had several really large maple trees in our property. And I remember, sitting under the trees. They have these helicopter seeds that twirl down, and we used to break those apart and stick them on our nose. I don't know why, but we used to do that. But anyway, so I had the maple leaf theme, and also those helicopter seeds are the two handles on the sides. There's a haiku etched around the rim of the piece that says, "It seems so endless, the green leaves and summer sun, though we know it's not." So it's essentially the idea of, there's a period of time, especially in the summer, where it seems like things are going on forever. That time stands still a little bit, but of course we know that time moves on and everything changes. So anyway, that was the original idea of this piece, and it came from that exhibition on the Kylex.
Very cool. Would you mind giving us kind of a breakdown of how this piece was made, or some of the techniques you used?
Sure. So this was raised in, I think it was 2 pieces. There was maybe 3, I'm not sure. Yeah, you can see that the base, this sort of funnel shape that was the base, and then the plate-like area that was the bowl of the Kylex. And so the cloisonné enameling was done on both of those separately. And then the whole piece was assembled with the silver rim, the handles there to resemble the helicopter ceilings. They were chased in silver and attached. I think the whole thing, there's a sort of bolt that goes through the whole center of the piece. You can see a temporary bolt that's on there as I'm putting it together, holds it all together. And then on the final piece, there's an enameled leaf that is the head of the bolt that runs down through, and then there's a piece on the underside that screws it all together. It's about, I've forgotten exactly. I would say it's probably about 10 inches in diameter, the bowl shape, and so the whole thing's maybe 6-7 inches tall, something like that.
Awesome. Thank you for a breakdown. Components, step-by-step process. Great. So I don't know, Cozette or Marilyn, whoever would like to jump in next and tell us a little bit about your piece that's in our show.
I can go next if you want, Cozette.
Sure, that'd be great.
My piece is a teapot, and it's made of pewter and copper, and I made it after Jack and I had a fire in our house in Oakland. It would have been right after, it was probably made in 1994, and it represents home, our house. It's kind of got a dark quality to it, which was reminiscent of the smoke damage that was done to our house. And the spikes that I put on the lid were kind of a defense mechanism against the bad things that had happened during that fire. There are little tiny windows, there's a little door, and there's a snake at the very bottom of the handle. And the snake represented and the insurance company, because we went through all sorts of things trying to get our lives back in order and our house repaired with no help really from the insurance company. It was a challenge, but we learned a lot. And we learned a lot about ourselves and the importance of family and friends and all the support that we got. The pewter is something that I don't use very often. I had taken a workshop with Fred Fenster a couple years before, and it was probably the second workshop I had taken with him. So I felt a little more comfortable with pewter. So I decided to use that for the teapot. And I like the color possibilities of that kind of dark gray that happened. And it is functional. Even though it looks like the liquid might come through the windows, they are capped from the inside. And it was just talking about, as I said, home and family, and also a little bit about architecture and living in Oakland, and just trying to express my love of home. I am pleased that it's part of the Gnome collection, and it brings back a lot of memories looking at it.
My goodness, I'm sure some very harrowing memories as well. Oh, Marilyn, I'm glad everyone was all right with that.
It was an interesting period in our lives, that's for sure.
And so you mentioned that using pewter was like a kind of a deliberate choice and someone outside of your usual kind of go-to materials. But could you talk us through some of the way that you approached constructing this piece?
Well, pewter's very interesting. It has a much lower melting point. So when you solder or weld pewter, it's very different than copper or silver. So you have to have a pretty completely different touch when you are working with it. I'm not that good at it, I don't think. I'm more comfortable soldering normally with silver solder, but it's very soft. The things I do like about pewter is that you can weld it together, which means that you can make it so you cannot see a seam in it if you're doing it properly. And also I like the fact that you can add non-ferrous metals or other ferrous metals to it, like those little tacks or steel. It's very easy to texture, and it's got a nice weight to it. The one problem with pewter, and it may have changed since then, but it's not advisable to work with pewter in the same area that you're doing your other metal work, because you don't want to contaminate each other. So that was one reason I really didn't continue with it, even though it might be interesting to pick it back up again and see what I can do. It is, and it's very easy to cast with. It's interesting material, that's for sure.
Thank you for sharing some about your choice to use pewter and how you approach that. I'll turn now to Cozette if you want to say a little bit about your piece.
Yeah, well, for a long time, I've been interested in the complex interrelationships between humans and the natural world. And I often use symbols as a way to communicate my ideas, just grown out of observance of the world around me, that natural world around me. And trees in particular have been a symbol I just keep going back to. I think for their resilience, I love how they push the concrete up on your sidewalks under your feet, and how the root system will kind of grow over the curbs and into the streets sometimes. And I made this particular piece while I was a resident doing a research residency at the Metal Museum. And while I was there, there were they just have these magnificent trees on the grounds, you know, these old growth, beautiful trees. And there was this one tree in particular that was kind of, you know, I think it reached the end of its time and it was kind of ill, and it was during a really harsh winter and it just kept dropping limbs and bark, and I was collecting and collecting those things, and eventually it had to come down. And so this piece kind of was a culmination of all of those interests and those experiences. And so that cross section is almost kind of playing into that memory. And with this title, I reflected on that because so many of us there were, I think, just deeply wounded and sad to see it go. And the presence of its absence was just palpable. Like it, you know, we felt its loss, and so this piece kind of grew out of that, just exposing and kind of paying homage to its history and its time. We think about those tree rings as a record keeper of what happened in a year, and so with that, we see that connection, and once again to our built world around us that we shape based on our needs and our desires. So the concrete kind of comes in as kind of that larger idea and that focus that I was interested on. So it was kind of that culmination of those things. And so with the technical side of things, I think I might have some pictures that I didn't have I didn't do a good job of recording this piece as it was made, but I think I threw in some pictures there of a process that's similar to what I might have used there. There we go. And what's so great about my time there, and that piece in particular for me personally, was that it was an evolution of an idea. It was an opportunity to start an idea and evolve it and see where it would take me. And it created a body of work. And so this is kind of that process where the outer rings go first through their forming. And those inner rings kind of vary in thickness of the gauge. So I can sometimes use slip rollers to form them and weld them, and I have pins and holes to create pathways for the material to flow. And again, casting comes in as that record and that memory of that bark that I collected. And so I took molds of that bark, and I still have those molds, and I still use those molds still today. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about casting. And so this piece in particular was made for, it ended up in Japan as a commission between two sister cities. And so I just typically will cast the bark in fragments, and that way I can kind of work within the limitations of whatever studio I'm in to kind of work as big as I can, and then kind of weld those things together to create a much larger form. And kind of, I think that kind of shows you. So when I have the Foundry access, I use it, but it's not always there. But here you can kind of see evidence of that process. And so the fragments became very necessary. But it kind of all started with just collecting those fragments on the grounds of the Metal Museum, and it kind of evolved into a way of working.
That's so cool. I remember kind of going through It Takes a Village and seeing your piece and being told that, oh, I remember that being made. It was kind of a cool experience to think that some inspiration happened while you were here with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So all of the works that are in It Takes a Village that you all spoke about seem to kind of capture a particular memory or a time and place in a moment, whether it was more happy or less happy moment. So I'd like to kind of shift now to the present and learn a little bit about what you all are currently working on now, and if in your experience COVID has impacted your practice at all over the past year, and some change, I guess.
Well, I did a series of 5 COVID pieces. They're jars that are closetly enameled, and I think I sent you a picture of one of them.
I think we have some images.
Each one had a flower on the top, and so number one was COVID jar number one. Chrysanthemum had a chrysanthemum on the top. Chrysanthemum symbolize fidelity and longevity. There are also images of bats in the background, and that's the piece there on the left. So there are bats around the chrysanthemum, and bats form a circle, sort of a frame around the piece. And so the whole idea was that, I mean, bats could possibly have been the source of the virus. So I was combining some ideas of both the limitations and the cause and effect of the virus. So each one, the second one had a lotus on the top, which symbolizes rebirth and purity. The third one was lavender, which implies wisdom and integrity. The fourth was rose, which is often symbolizing love or innocence.
It was so weird to see everybody in face masks, and you can no longer see somebody smile. And if they're wearing sunglasses, you can hardly tell any expression on their face. So the piece I made, the chatelaine, was to be functional because it was to hold your face mask and your rubber gloves, and it also included a tape measure so that you stayed 6 feet away from whoever was near you. But it's also talking about kind of a blank look on people's face, in their eyes. To me, it made quite an impression. So I ended up making 2 chatelaines. Chatelaine was worn by the mistress of the house and started off as a way for her to carry her keys. And then it grew from there into being a way to hang things off the waistband that might be a small utensil, like a pencil, a pad of paper, a mirror. And it just has grown. There you go. I was in a chatelaine show several years ago that Helen Drupp put together that started off in Finland. It was a beautiful show with a catalog. And I became interested in the idea of chatelaines as a way of wearing jewelry somewhere else on your body besides on your ears or around your neck. I liked the idea that it could hang off your waist. And so I decided, well, you definitely need to have your face mask with you and your gloves and your tape measure. And so that's how this piece came about. And there are hooks on the back side of this top piece that can go over your belt or your waistband. And all the surface is done with gesso and colored pencil, which is something that I use in most of my work, with the exception of the sterling silver and the bits of brass that you see. So it was just a comment on utility and our new normal, our new way of existing. We have no idea how long it'll be before it's safe not to wear a face mask. And it's interesting because people, now that you are wearing face masks, they don't focus so much on your face. They may look more at you and what you're wearing, what jewelry you might have on, your earrings or your chatelaine that you wear to the grocery store. So that's how this piece came about.
That's fascinating. Just seeing like such direct parallels with your current work or, chatelaine, something you've been interested in recently. So that's awesome. And all I know is I want one. It's the functional piece we all need.
Right, right. So I'm on sabbatical this semester, and I'm pursuing just the idea of the chatelaine. It may evolve into something other than COVID related, but it was my starting point.
Let's bring them back. Marilyn, I love it. All right, and I think we've got PowerPoint capabilities back now. So Cozette, if you want to pick up where you left off and remind us of what image you would like us to pull up.
Oh, sure. We could bring up the seashells, I guess, with the headset.
Okay. Moment for that. Thank you.
Yeah. And so with these, it's kind of, I kind of walked them through the idea, but they're quite heavy and not very practical to actually to wear, just so you can kind of feel the weight of kind of thinking about the time that we live in now. And it kind of employs all the metals that I enjoy working with, just for the nature of the materials and their ability to cast and fabricate and replicate that experience, kind of that connection to the natural world, was so important to record that through the act of casting for me. So that's kind of this piece, resonance. And then I can kind of take you, if you've got the other image of one of the most recent things, that these two kind of happened at the same time. And this piece, I'm interdisciplinary, so I use a lot of different materials in my work, and always usually metal comes in at some point. There's just tiny little rivets, but the majority of this piece is recycled Walmart bags. And I think it is kind of evocative too of our times that we're living in now, and the things that are on our consciousness as humanity. We're facing so many different issues right now, and that limitation to COVID of access to materials. I've kind of not been getting the same metals and going out, to purchase those things as much as I normally would, and so I look at those challenges of, okay, how can I pivot, and looking to me and my environment, and kind of recycling things from what's around me to create this piece of the snake skin. And again, I go back to the symbolism of nature and how it can help me communicate. And I borrow from that for the snake. I keep going back to it again, and kind of recently, where for me, in many cultures, it's a symbol for healing. It's a symbol kind of for life, and then for others, it's the symbol of absolute evil. And so I like that duality and that combination through that symbolism. And there might be a little critique on Walmart and those big box stores mixed in as well, but try not to point too many fingers with my work, as opposed to kind of giving people a place to let their thoughts take them as they contemplate the image I present. But for me, I kind of like that cutting out of the Walmart bags as kind of that absence, and that negative space and that void that these materials can cause when they enter our environments.
Yes, so many of the themes you touched on are so relevant to just our current life, right? And our experiences of the world around us. So it's incredible to see how you've taken all of that and put it into your work. All right, folks. So we've kind of talked some about how you got started and your careers and what you're working on now, but I'd like to kind of shift focus a little bit. And one question I'd like to ask all of you is, do you all have any advice for artists who are just beginning their careers? And maybe it's advice in general, or maybe it's some advice from lessons learned in your own practice during COVID, but I'd just love to open that question up to you all.
Go for it, Marilyn.
I think the Professor Emeritus should start.
Well, now that I'm retired from teaching, I kind of retired at a good time because I missed the whole COVID thing. I haven't had to do Zoom or teach online or any of those things. As far as advice, I think most of it just has to do with commitment. You know, people have to decide what it is they want and what it is they're willing to do and what compromises they're willing to make. You know, if you want to own yachts and jet planes and stuff, probably art's not the best field to go into. I don't mean that you have to be a starving artist, but you make certain compromises. You give up certain things so that you'll achieve others. Certainly, you have to be committed to what you're doing because it takes a lot of time and effort. And I mean, I feel really fortunate because I've spent my whole life making a living doing what I love to do. That doesn't mean that everything I did, I loved doing. I taught for 40 years and I loved interaction with students. They didn't necessarily love interacting with university bureaucracy, but you know, you give up certain things in order to gain other things. So I used to tell students, you know, nobody gets through this without compromising. You give up one thing so that you can gain another. I think too often people become discouraged because they didn't realize what compromises they were going to have to make. So, you know, whether any of the arts, whether you're in dance or you're a novelist or you play the saxophone or whatever, if you love what you're doing, it's going to be worthwhile. But just to realize that there are things that you have to compromise along the way.
That's great advice, Harlan. The 2 C's, commitment and compromise. That's great. Thank you. Marilyn, Cozette, how about you all? Any advice for artists beginning their careers?
Well, I think Carla and I we're in a good place in the fact that we've experienced a lot of things through our years of teaching, but they are definitely changing now with this online teaching, which it sounds like quite a few places will continue with online teaching, even if it's hybrid. And that is something you have to get used to. As far as starting out in a career, especially in metals, all I can say is you just have to keep working at it. You have to keep practicing. You have to, if you're unable to attend a college or university, then you really should take workshops and just try to get as much experience as possible. Find the place that you're most comfortable. Definitely do research. I think research makes people's work so much more interesting because you're able to talk about your work in a more complete manner. I really feel for people starting out right now, especially with this COVID situation going on. But I'm sure there are ways to get around it. And luckily, metalsmiths, we can work in a solitude way. We can just be by ourselves at our bench and get a lot accomplished. So we're lucky there. And I just would say, just work very, very hard. And this is one odd little thing that I would advise to somebody starting, which I wish I had done, but I wish I had always used the same kind of sketchbook for my entire life because I got big ones, I got little ones, I got pick one and use it. And that way you can be really organized. That's my
That's great. I think there's no piece of advice too big or too small, right? It's all just something you've learned.
right.
I love the idea of something specific and concrete like that, but also the concept of like indulging in some research and thinking about that is another way to kind of grow your practice. So we love to hear that.
Oh, and also enter a lot of things, network with people. That's how you get your work out there. That's how they see it. They become interested in it. Somebody might be putting a show together and say, oh, I saw so-and-so's piece. That would be perfect for this exhibition. So don't be afraid to get your work out there and just keep entering work and look at shows online since we can only do that right now, but then get back into the habit of going to galleries and museums and supporting all of those places like Nome.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right, Cozette, how about you? What advice do you have for our artists looking to start their careers?
Well, I love what you both said and about research and commitment. And I just kind of echo all of those things. I appreciate what you said so much already. And just want to add to that to just experiment. I think experimenting to see where your interests lie and discover new potential. Also embrace the process. It's not, take the good with the bad. And I think we can learn from all of these experiences that we have. And sometimes even more from those that are most challenging. I think we see most growth and that can come out of it. And at least that's often what I see with my students. And I think, just putting Marilyn said, putting yourself out there and especially seeking out. And this is coming from an introvert who's shy, and I know what's good for, like, as hard as it is, I have to push myself to put myself in those seeking out those uncomfortable situations because there's opportunities there. And just kind of just don't give up, just keep going. And like Marilyn said, apply. You never know what can come out of that process.
Yeah, no, that is very astute. And I kind of drawing parallels in what you were saying between experimentation in your practice and your art, and then kind of pushing boundaries in your personal life and growth as well too, kind of doing some experimenting, putting yourself out there. It's all a very vulnerable place, right? Awesome. That was really great advice from everyone. Thank you all for sharing. I think what I'd like to do now, because we lost some time due to technical difficulties, I'd love to encourage anyone who's tuning in at home to drop in your questions in our chat. We might have lost some as we lost power, so feel free to resend. And I think I might turn our attention that way and take some questions from everyone who joined us today. Some of the questions I'm seeing that we were able to capture before we lost power are for Marilyn. Marilyn, someone wanted to know, isn't the gesso vulnerable to being scratched off of the metal pretty easily in your work?
It depends on how you use it. You definitely don't want to go banging it around against things, but one key thing to do is make sure you have texture on your metal before you gesso it. And that can be done with sandblasting. That can also be done with diamond burrs and even little electric engravers. The second thing would be to make sure that you put layers of gesso on and let each layer cure or dry very well. And the third thing is, after you apply whatever kind of color you use, color pencil, paint, whatever, seal it very well. make sure that you let everything dry and cure very well. It actually is pretty durable. I've been surprised over the years of how durable it is. It obviously can't take something sharp against it, but as far as rubbing it a lot, I mean, I never make it to wear against the skin, but it definitely can be a brooch or a neck piece or chatelaine or tiara. But I mean, it's as vulnerable as a really shiny piece of silver. If you scratch it, you're going to have a problem. So you just have to be careful how you wear it. You can also you could do something that's pierced and put it over top of the gessoed surface so that it's actually protected by something over it, allowing the colors still to come through. There are different ways to work around that.
Thank you. We had another question come in for you, Marilyn, about your chatelaine, and someone was wondering if you wore that out to the grocery store. Adventures outside.
No, I wish I could have, but it had to go off to a show, and I didn't get to wear it. But my jewelry, I hate to see it put in a drawer, so I had a big frame made for it so it could be hung on the frame when it's not being worn, and it can still be out and viewed.
Great. Thank you. And we just had a great question come in for all of you. The question is, as award winners, do you find anything in common in your work? And I know you've all kind of touched on themes of memory and a moment, as well as nature. But I wasn't sure what you all see as maybe a connecting factor with your pieces.
Well, I definitely would agree with the idea of nature. That's pretty obvious in memories. I think what's really nice is that the work, even though we have those things in common, it's very diverse, and each of us are coming from a different place, a different way of making, and a different concept in mind.
I know the nature theme runs through everyone. I really responded to Cozette's slices of the tree and seeing the tree rings and so forth. That it's sort of almost archetypal, that the symbol of the rings of the tree. And also the snake imagery, both from Marilyn's piece that has a snake on the handle and Cozette's larger piece with the Walmart bags. I've done a number of pieces using the snake imagery, and I've always been fascinated by snakes because of that fact that in some cases they're revered in some cultures, and in others they're considered a representation of evil. So whenever I look at someone's work, of course I compare it not in terms of quality, but in terms of source and content to my own work and my own ideas.
Yeah, I think I can echo those same connections. I think just the act of kind of recording those experiences through those kind of symbols that have kind of shown up in each of our works, I think is an interesting connection as well.
Great. Thank you all for attacking that question with me, just trying to make those connections. We had another question come in for Harlan. Harlan, how did you stone the cloisonne on the inside?
Okay, I think that must have been Sarah who asked that question. On a lot of my pieces now, I use like a diamond grit abrasive, but previous to that, I used just stones, alundum stones or carborundum stones, and they will conform to the concave areas, when you use them with water, the stone will eventually sort of conform to that curve. And so that's what I used on the insides of the Kylex piece.
Awesome. Oh, a question for Cozette. Cozette, what mold material do you use?
Oh, that's a great question. I use a lot of different, like I said, I love to experiment. That's a big part of my process. And so I've tried out a lot of different materials. A really great company just to work with all around is Smooth On. They have great tech team that can advise you based on kind of how you need it to perform. So I've tried everything from Umu molds to Rebound 25 from them as a favorite, and it lasts, way longer than the recommended shelf life, which is another bonus. And there's dragon skin, and there's and then just your traditional plaster for some ideas will work. So yeah, I think I kind of float between all of those.
Gotcha. Thank you. We had a few more questions come in for Marilyn. One question is, Marilyn, when did you start telling stories in metal in color? Was it early on in your career, kind of later?
I started experimenting with alternative surface embellishment using gesso and, excuse me, color pencil probably in 1985. I had started with very large forms, and I didn't know there were different colored gessos, so I was using white gesso, and I was texturing it, and it was really great for putting color over and then rubbing it, because the high points would look kind of worn and expose the gesso. And people who were not familiar with what I was using thought I had etched my surfaces. So it was kind of interesting to play around with the texture. I was using a plastic fork at first, just to experiment. But even putting the gesso on with a brush, that texture would come through. And so I've always loved color. I've always loved drawing, but I'm a really three-dimensional person. So this gave me the best of both worlds, and I was able to use my love of drawing and color on the surface. It's more immediate than enameling. I've tried enameling, I've done enameling. I love enameling, but I don't think I'm an enamelist. Who knows? It may happen someday, but it would just allow me to achieve this wonderful palette of colors that is available through when you put gesso on anything, on canvas, on metal, on wood, on steel. You can use any sort of media on it. You can use paint, you can use graphite, color pencils, crayons. So it's just got a lot of possibilities, and I'm just trying to create. I love making the pieces, and my pieces are pretty much, if I didn't put color on them, they would be finished. I would probably patina them and call them finished. But then I take that next step and I apply the color. And I don't color every part of the piece in some cases. I like making the transition from the gessoed surface to the metal itself. But I would guess it was probably 1985 that I started really getting into this process.
Great. And thinking of color and just enameling, what you were talking about, Marilyn, Harlan, someone's curious. They're saying you're so prolific with what seems like a really intense process with vessel construction through fine enameling. Do you have any like shop assistants or any kind of assistants helping you do this work, or is it something that you just do all yourself?
Well, for most of my career, I've done it myself. I did have, for about 5 or 6 years, we initiated a internship where students from the University of North Texas, anywhere from 1 to 3 each semester, would come and work with me in my studio. So when they came to work with me, they were working on my work, and that did increase the level of production during that time. Of course, once COVID hit, that sort of eliminated all of that. But it was quick. So I was so used to, and I think many metalsmiths are used to working alone. It was interesting having someone else in the shop with me for that period of time. And I think you learn something from an internship. It's a little bit different than just being a student. So I felt it was valuable both for the students and for me. Whether I'll do it again, I'm not sure, but yes.
Great, thank you. And then thinking of kind of learning and experimenting with working with others, Cozette, a question came in for you about mold materials, kind of your experience with those. Have you ever poured metal directly into a silicone mold?
Yeah, I have, and I do that a lot when I work with pewter specifically, and just due to the nature of kind of moving around a lot in my life and not always having access to kind of a larger foundry. I often will work with pewter and continue to do so, and it's perfect with the low melting temperature to go right into silicone molds. I think in terms of if for specifics, I like the Rebound 25, and I've actually found that I like it with a plaster mother mold as opposed to doing it kind of one large block pour of the mold material itself, because I found that kind of lets the heat release a little bit faster that way. But yeah, that's been really great, and I think I'm lucky to live near a distributor here in Washington that sells those products, so it makes it all the better in terms of access to those types of materials to keep experimenting with. But yeah, definitely do that.
Great, thank you. And then speaking of pewter, Marilyn, we got a question that came in about your piece Dwelling. And just reiterating that the teapot is functional, correct? I thought I remembered you saying that, but I just wanted to make sure.
I like the illusion that it might not be, that when you start pouring all the water would come out of the windows. I think that'd be kind of interesting, but it is functional.
Thank you. And then a question came in about your chatelaines and kind of the influence for your making them. Someone was curious if the chatelaines were specifically influenced by kind of the Finnish aesthetic, and if so, how and why that inspires you.
I've always loved containers, and I like them whether they're sitting on a table or you're wearing them as a locket or something on your bracelet. But I just felt like the COVID problem that we have, and the having to use the mask constantly and the rubber gloves, was the chatelaine was a perfect vehicle for this. So, and as I said, I had been in a chatelaine show previously that really got my interest started in chatelaines, and they've been in the back of my mind since then, but now they're coming back out. And I just, as I say, I love the idea of containers and functional objects.
Thank you. And thank all of the participants who joined us today. These are some really great questions you're sending in. So thank you very much for that. And on that note, we have a question for all of you. And this is from Judith, who's joined us today. Judith says, I'm a self-taught studio jeweler and moving toward closing my studio. I will not have access to using a torch and have limited tools, so wondering what is next. Any suggestions?
You mean not having a torch? What do you do without a torch? I love rivets, so I would say rivet everything. Cold joining.
Gotcha.
Yeah, definitely cold connections, but I think pewter, that's why I fell in love with pewter, is just that, you know, if you're interested in soldering it together, you can get some of those soldering irons that you can plug in, and they're powerful enough with the low melting temp to do the job on some, based on your thickness, of course, but can get you some of the way. Just, you know, definitely get yourself some ventilation if you're working at home, for sure. Safety is a big thing, just to, you know, protect yourself long term. But if you're looking to cast with pewter, that's how I kept going with my practice, is just an electric plug-in component, skillet, what am I, burner, an electric burner is what I'm looking for, and a cast iron teapot. And there you go. And good ventilation. And so that can keep you going, I think, if you have an interest in that type of metal.
I would say do a lot of drawing and journaling and things that may end up being metal oriented at a later date. So, you know, in some cases, those situations force you to do some things that maybe you wouldn't have done, but end up being an advantage in the long run. So, you know, if you can't work in the shop at all, that's what I recommend.
Awesome. Thank you all for your really thoughtful answers during this Q&A. I think that's all the questions we've caught that have come in. If anyone has any additional questions they'd like to ask our panelists, feel free to drop those in the chat now. But really, I'm just so grateful for you all joining us today and for your time and your talents. And it's such an honor to speak with you and to also have your work represented in our collection and in It Takes a Village, our crowd curated exhibition. So thank you all so much for joining us. All right. Oh, we got, I think, one more question that came in. People are really interested in these chatelaines, Marilyn. Someone says they're new to the chatelaine and I'm surprised that it's not such an ergonomic tool, apparel, whatnot, question mark. People are interested in that.
You know, they became useful to both genders. I mean, men they could wear their watches somehow connected to something. So they're for everybody.
Definitely. All right, I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in, so I'll use this as an opportunity to kind of wrap up our event today. Thank you all so much for joining us again, and thank you, Cozette, Harlan, and Marilyn. We appreciate your time with us and just hearing more about your practice and your work. It's always a pleasure. For those who joined us today, if you want to see more of It Takes a Village, you can head on over to our website and take a digital gallery tour, which is a lot of fun. You'll be able to see pieces by Cozette, Harlan, and Marilyn, as well as some of the other pieces that were kind of voted in by our wonderful supporters. I'd also like to give a special thank you to our donors and our members whose support makes free programming like this possible. And if you're interested in donating to the Metal Museum or becoming a member, you can check out our chat, and we've got links for doing just that. And thank you all so much for your support. We appreciate it. And at this point, I'll go ahead and we'll end our meeting today and we'll end our recording. But thank you all again so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all take care.
You too.